Hey everyone, and welcome to SkillCapped. I'm the King Live, and today we're going to be going over the top 5 things that you need to know from VCT Masters to help you dominate in your competitive games in Valorant. If you're anything like me and you have been keeping up with Masters throughout the course of the tournament, possibly you picked up a few interesting things between the teams that really stood out to you. I think there are a couple of really awesome shifts in the meta that were very apparent from watching the games, and by helping you all stay informed, it could really help give people the best chance in their own matchmaking games. But before we get into it though, let's introduce our question of the day, which is, which region do you think is the best at Valorant? Let's keep it civil in the comments, no reason to bash other regions, but I'm interested to hear what you all have to say. All of the regions seem to play pretty differently, so I think it's really fun to compare. Moving on to our very first thing that really deserves attention though was how prominent Raze was throughout the entire tournament. Some teams even opting to pick Raze over any other duelist, and we're not even talking about specifically on bind and split here. The team I'm talking about specifically obviously is 100 Thieves, who made the decision to pick Raze almost exclusively throughout the entire tournament, and not only that, but they decided to pick Raze as their only duelist, and they did this to pretty decent effect. Of course, 100 Thieves did not end up winning the tournament, and when compared to teams like Sentinels and FaZe, it's very apparent that Jett is still the preferred duelist for the most part. However, for players who believe that Raze is a character you can only pick on bind and split, I really want to open up your mind to the possibility of playing Raze on other maps as well. With how lethal Raze's utility is, she really brings something to the team that no other duelist does. Just using her showstopper alone demands so much respect from the enemy team, and is probably the single strongest space creating ability in the game. When you combine this with the information her Roomba gives, along with her ability to duel enemies using her satchels to throw off their aim, Raze is an incredibly strong duelist on any map, and she's been slept on for way too long. Of course, she's always seen play on bind and split, but during this tournament we saw her played a lot more on Haven, Ascent, and Icebox as well, and that's what I wanted to bring to light. Jett is still the strongest op agent in the game for sure, but when it comes to the strongest duelist overall, Raze might be making her way to the front of the scene, and that's why I highly recommend, if you're a duelist player, you may want to look into playing Raze on not just bind and split, but all of the other maps as well. Aside from 100 Thieves, she's seen a lot more play from FaZe, Envy, and Immortals, and that's just for NA. I know Yassine almost exclusively runs Raze with Guild as well in EU, so do yourself a favor and keep an eye on Raze, because I really believe this trend is going to continue upwards. And before we move on to the next thing you need to know for Masters, if you haven't already, be sure to head down into the description below and check out skillcapped.com. If you're looking to improve, this is the place for you. We have up-to-date lineups, courses on how to improve with all agents, Smurf commentaries where a higher rank player walks you through how to carry in your rank, and so much more. Come join over 500,000 satisfied members, improve that KDA, and get the rank you've always wanted at skillcapped.com. Link in the description below. Moving on though, the second thing that really stuck out to me is how prominent the operator is on Icebox specifically, and this is a really big deal for a lot of players because Icebox seems to be widely considered one of the most hated maps in Valorant. Now, we were just talking about how prominent Raze has been. However, on Icebox, this is Jett's play place, and it's for a specific reason. There are so many different operator angles that you can hold on Icebox, and with how large the map is, it's very important to have a weapon that is capable of holding down an area alone and playing for a pick on the off chance that somebody pushes it. Holding a default setup on Icebox spreads your team out way too thin, so most Icebox matches in VCT were just a game full of 2 enemy Jetts duking it out with an operator on A site, looking to see who could land the first pick for their team. This could potentially be part of the reason that 100 Thieves actually struggled versus Gen G during their lower brackets games, especially on defense. Since 100 Thieves has started running Raze as their only duelist, they don't really have a great option for who to put the operator on. If they run the operator on Raze, they sacrifice a lot of ability to retake territory, but if they run the operator on any other agent, they run a very dangerous risk of losing that operator, since no other agent has the same fast movement as a character like Jett. Now, although I did just say Raze is becoming way more prominent in the meta right now, Icebox is very much an operator map, and Jett is still the best op user. In fact, the operator is so necessary on Icebox, this is why you even see Steel picking up the operator on Killjoy to attempt to fill that role for his team in the game versus Gen G. Out of the entire tournament though, the one Icebox match that really stuck out to me was FaZe versus Sentinels the very first time they played. This would be the first series that Sentinels would be playing with tenz, but actually on the Icebox map, Shazam would be the one playing the operator role on Jett versus Baby Bay, who had a breakout tournament for FaZe. This is the tournament that really put FaZe on the map, and I know that many people were actually cheering for them to win. However, when Sentinels and FaZe ended up playing each other, Sentinels actually crushed them both times. And don't get me wrong, tenz actually had a great game on Icebox, but the story of the first half was basically Shazam picking off players left and right with the operator, and it just goes to show how strong of a gun the operator is on a map like Icebox. If you're struggling to win games on Icebox and you consider yourself to be more of a rifle user, I highly recommend that you try picking up the operator role for your team and holding down some of these early, incredibly dangerous angles to peak. There are simply too many angles on this map to clear them all, and landing a kill early on into the round for your team makes it incredibly difficult for the enemy team to play around. It's expensive, and I know a lot of players don't like opping to begin with, but trust me, on Icebox, it's incredibly important to have an operator on your team, especially when playing on defense. Moving on though, the third thing that really stood out to me that a lot of players maybe just overlook at this point, but it's still incredibly important to mention. Omen is still very much the best controller, at least as far as VCT was concerned. Now, it's important to keep in mind, I don't believe Astra was allowed to be played during this tournament, so things could potentially change within the next set of matches. However, Omen will always have something that the other controllers don't have, which is ease of use. He is hands down the most flexible controller in the game, and although things like Viper's Molly and Brimstone's ultimate are incredibly strong, Omen's ability to smoke anything, anywhere, at pretty much any time will almost always put him ahead of the other controllers. When you couple this with the fact that his blind is just so incredibly strong, it doesn't really matter that the Omen nerfs ended up coming in a couple patches ago. Omen still remains on top for the time being. Astra has a ton of potential, and time will tell for sure if teams begin to pick her up in the coming tournaments. But I can only speak for this tournament right now, and it was no question Omen is still the preferred controller in Valorant Pro Play. Omen was the best before VCT, and until we see how teams adjust to Astra's addition to the game, Omen will likely remain the best. Moving on to an agent who has stepped out of the meta for a bit though, and recently seems to be making their way back in. Everyone say welcome back to Sage. It actually depends on the team what map they like to run Sage on, but specifically for Icebox, she's been seeing a ton more play. As we were talking about earlier with the operator, the map is just so massive, and having the ability to wall off specific areas and create opportunities for your team can be super convenient. Whether it comes to that A execute teams like to do where they wall off the back of site for plant and play at elevated angles for the post plant, or that B execute where they wall off the right side of site and sneak a plant from there, Sage makes playing Icebox on both attack and defense infinitely easier, and that's why she's seeing a lot of play there. Other examples of Sage, however, include how Nitro has been using her a lot to hold down locations on Ascent, as well as the classic Sage on Split that people know all too well. Sage still exists in the meta for sure, and although Icebox is definitely her strongest map, there was a time not too long ago that many players thought Sage was a pretty weak agent. When compared to other sentinels, she oftentimes doesn't even get considered a sentinel, just because she doesn't have the ability to watch flanks. However, she is pretty much the #1 agent in the game at stalling out pushes, and her ability to boost up onto her wall and get angles no other character can get makes it so she's incredibly versatile. One of the things I've seen Nitro using Sage for recently is using her wall to peek over Omen smokes and catch players off guard, and it's actually super fun to see, and if you've been on the edge about picking up Sage, I highly recommend you look into it. Lots of teams are running her on all sorts of different maps because her kit is just that awesome when used correctly. Although she's not going to work for every single team in pro play, in comp her ability to support her team, stall out pushes, and also play aggressively with tools like her wall and heal, Sage is still very much a prominent agent in Valorant right now, and if you haven't been playing her, I highly recommend giving her a shot if she seems like your type of playstyle. Moving on to our very last apparent thing that came from VCT though, and that's going to come almost directly from FaZe themselves. During Masters, FaZe really showed us just how scary this sort of Deathball team comp can be. And although they didn't end up winning the tournament, second place is nothing to be joked about, and looking ahead to Iceland when Valorant's first LAN will be taking place, what I've heard specifically from Korea is that these sorts of Deathball team comps are very prominent and very well refined. Specifically, what I'm referring to when I say these Deathball comps are these sorts of Breach, Raze, Jet, Omen, Sova team comps that are just made to rush the enemy down with flashes, dashes, and recons and absolutely overwhelm them. They're designed in a way that sacrifices map control in an attempt to give your team more upfront power, and although map control is something that can be incredibly valued in a game like Valorant, when a team plays this aggressively out the gate and gets momentum rolling, it can be very difficult to stop at times. I think this is the really beautiful thing about Valorant to me, and as time goes on, it's only going to get more crazy. When you compare the top Jet players in the game to each other, you're going to bring up some really crazy talented players. Tenz and Baby Bay are the two players that immediately come to mind to me when I think North American Valorant, and when you think of these players and how crazy good they are, it's important to keep in mind Valorant is still very much a new game. It's been around for about a year now, and if this is how good players are right now, what is it going to look like 3 years down the road? And what about 8 years down the road? With all of the different different agents in the game and the different possibilities, it can make for some very interesting team comps and scenarios, and what we believe is meta is going to constantly be shifting. For many players, especially in their comp games, the thought of not running a sentinel and leaving their flanks open sounds like a really dangerous idea. But for a team like FaZe, they make it work incredibly well. They're aggressive and explosive, and it's incredibly exciting to watch, and I can't wait to see more from teams like this. In the end, FaZe didn't end up winning this tournament, but in terms of matchmaking Valorant, although having a sentinel to cover your flanks may be nice to have, I mostly just want to encourage players to not be a slave to the meta. The meta is constantly changing, and what is considered meta today might not be considered meta tomorrow. You're not a professional Valorant player. You're likely not even playing at the highest level of play. Literally anything can work in these lower ranks, and if you want to run no sentinel and instead run 5 flashed agents, just go for it. It's going to have a different playstyle for sure, but that doesn't mean that it can't work, and that was really shown by FaZe's success in VCT. Anyway though, those are just some of my thoughts from VCT, and if you guys really want to improve, win more gunfights, and get the rank that you've always wanted, I highly recommend you check out SkillCapped.com. Link in the description below. VCT has been a blast to watch, and I can't wait to watch the next tournament. I know most of what I talked about was from the North American region. Honestly, there are so many games being played across all of the regions, I find it even difficult to keep up with my own region, let alone keep up with EU and Korea as well, and I'm pretty sure that's leaving out a number of other regions for matches as well. Trust me, when I have the time in my day to watch every single Valorant match played, I will, but until that day comes, this is what you're getting from me. If you guys are watching this on YouTube and you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel down below. It really does help us out, and other than that, as always, I'm the King Live, and we here at SkillCapped want to thank you all for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.